Let me speak now by way of brief preview of Reformed Trinitarian theology and Reformed Federalism as a theological alternative to Thomism. Herman Ridderbos, with his characteristic depth of insight, develops an embryonic theology of processional relations and missional relations from Colossians 1:15a and 1:15b. He does not develop it in the fullness by which we will develop it, but the embryonic insights are most certainly present. He observes, quote, "By calling Christ the image of God, he identifies Christ's glory with that of God himself." And the same thing applies in Colossians 1:15, that there is a special reference to Christ's glory as the pre-existent one in these passages, in Colossians 1:15a, 1:15b, and by extension to verse 16. He says further, "It is evident here anew, therefore, to what extent the divine glory of Christ, even already in his pre-existence with the Father, prior to his redemptive revelation, determines and underlies the Pauline Christology. And this yields the proper conclusion, quote, we have before us in Colossians 1 a Christological interpretation of creation." So for Ridderbos, Colossians 1:15a and b supplies a rich resource to develop from the Scriptures the depth and beauty of the creator-creature relation, and the depth and beauty of that relation in terms of processional relation of personal origin, image of God, and in terms of a missional relation of what I will call incoronation, firstborn over all creation. Now, there are two main exegetical considerations that underwrite Ridderbos's interpretive conclusion that the image of the invisible God denotes an eternal Trinitarian relation of origin, a processional relation, and that firstborn of all creation in 15b denotes a missional relation, a relation to creation. To put this in the language of Thomas that we looked at earlier, image of God denotes an eminent relation within the ontological Trinity, firstborn over all creation, a transitive relation to that which is outside of the Trinity, to creation. Two main lines of thought underlie Ridderbos's observation. First, the poetic structure of the strophic arrangement requires verses 15 and 16 to denote the eternal relation of the Son to the Godhead, 15a, and his new relation to creation, 15b, prior to and apart from his incarnation in calendar time. The passage is arranged in terms of two strophes, 15 through 16, 18b through 20, with a transition in between. And so the first strophe, 15 through 16, brings into view the pre-existence of the eternal Son of God in a processional relation, image of God, in a missional relation, firstborn over all creation. Second, Ridderbos observes that image and firstborn mutually interpret one another and mutually reinforce one another. And this will open up for us the organic unity between a processional relation of personal origin in the image of God and a missional relation in the Son's relation to creation. Now, this opens up for us one additional insight that I'd like to talk about just very briefly. Ridderbos helps us think about the creator-creature relation from both the divine side and the human side. When we view the new relation to creation, Colossians 1:15b, from the divine side, it is that the person of the Son does not change in his sovereignly willed new relation to creation. Just as the Father of lights does not change like shifting shadows in his relation to creation, so the eternal image of the immutable Father does not change like shifting shadows in his relation to creation. Put in capsule form, the image of the invisible God denotes an immutable person of the Son in relations of personal origin, subsistence, and coinherence. Firstborn over creation denotes the immutable person of the Son in his sovereignly willed new relation to heaven and earth, which I'll talk about in a moment. The logic from the human side is that Adam's creation, as the image of God and in covenant with God, replicates the relation of origin and coinherence within the Trinity. The creature comes forth from God in a relation of personal communion, not abstract intellective and volitional capacities, but in person-to-person fellowship with the triune God. Colossians 1:15 opens that up for our understanding. Now, I could say more. I have more in my notes, but I'm not going to. Secondly, Colossians 1:15b, especially in relation to verse 16, opens up our understanding of the new relation of the Son and his invisible mission in relation to creation. This will be something Thomas does not even develop as far as I'm aware, but the Reformed tradition has. In verse 16, Paul presents the cosmic architecture of the new relation of the Son of God to creation as firstborn over creation. And he does so in terms of a chiasm. A, B, B prime, A prime. And that language in Colossians 1:16 says that the Son is the firstborn over all creation, things in heaven, things on earth, things visible, things invisible. The new relation that the Son sustains to creation is to all things invisible and visible. And Meredith Kline argues extensively in God, Heaven, and Harmageddon that Colossians 1:16b is inspired commentary on Genesis 1:1 and following. He says, as Genesis 1:1 is interpreted in light of Nehemiah 9:6 and other texts, he says this: what the opening verse states is that God in the beginning created both the upper and lower spatial spheres. The heavens and the earth is not just a merismus, a pair of antonyms that denotes a single totality. The phrase rather denotes concretely the actual two components that together comprehend all of creation. More precisely, what Genesis 1:1 affirms is that God created not just the spatial dimensions immediately accessible to man, but the heavens too. That is, the invisible realm of the divine glory and angelic beings. This interpretation is reflected in the Apostle Paul's Christological exposition of Genesis 1:1, declaring that the Son created all things that are in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones, dominions, principalities, or powers. Similarly, Nehemiah, reflecting on the Genesis creation account, finds a reference there to the invisible heavens of the angels, Nehemiah 9:6, and the only possible referent is the heavens of Genesis 1:1. End of quote. That's from God, Heaven, and Harmageddon, pages 228 and 229. Heaven, in Colossians 1:16, is thus a distinct created realm that is presently veiled from sight. It is the archetypal dwelling place of God, after which provisional earthly dwelling places are patterned, whether it's the protological Eden, the typological tabernacle or temple, or the typological land of Canaan. Heaven is the original temple dwelling of God, populated with an angelic host. And the point that Paul is making, and a point that Meredith Kline makes, is that in the absolute beginning, the Son of God is enthroned over all principalities, all thrones, all dominions, all rulers, and all authorities. The glory of the heavenly presence is a royal glory, the glory of a king, exalted above a myriad of servants attending about his throne. The point that we will develop is that in the absolute beginning, the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, created the invisible temple and filled it not only with angels, but was incoronate and filled that realm with the glory of his indoxate Spirit to the glory of the coronate Father. The Father is coronate. The Son is incoronate at the Father's right hand. And the Spirit is indoxate in that heavenly realm. And it is that realm that is the end of creaturely beatitude. It is that realm to which Adam is ordered as an earthbound image bearer under the covenant of works, with Sabbath rest in heaven as his goal, as his telos, as his covenantal term, if we speak in Thomistic language. These insights, and these are very brief, lay a groundwork for a totalizing Reformed alternative to Thomas's sacerdotal system of processional exitus and reditus. The created visible heaven, not the uncreated essence of God, is the medium for a relation of fellowship between God and his perfected creature. The created visible heaven, not the uncreated essence of God, is the medium for beatitude created by God in the absolute beginning. That beatitude was forfeited by Adam in his disobedience under the covenant of works. That beatitude was merited by Christ in his obedience and satisfaction for his people as mediator, and it was entered into not at the instant of his incarnation, but at the instant of his resurrection, followed 40 days later by his ascension into glory. The end or term of beatitude is covenantal fellowship with the coronate Father, the incoronate Son, and the indoxate Spirit in the glory heaven. The consummation of all things consists in a heavenizing movement by which the very good earth and the righteous on it are transformed and conformed to the glory of the Father, Son, and Spirit, indwelling that heaven temple for personal covenantal fellowship with image bearers. The missions of the Trinitarian persons, whether in creation under the covenant of works or in redemption under the covenant of grace, serve the end of heavenizing beatitude in covenantal fellowship with God. The Trinitarian processions and the Trinitarian missions serve a covenantal end, consummated communion with the triune God in his heaven dwelling. Trinitarian theology, then, as we saw, structures Thomas's medieval Roman Catholic theology from beginning to end and decisively shapes every doctrinal locus. His Trinitarian system orbits around and explicates the organic link between the eternal processions of the Son and the Spirit and the rational creature's participation in those eternal processions through deifying grace conferred by the missions of the Son and Spirit. That grace elevates the temporal creature above his nature to a share in the eternal processions themselves. But Trinitarian theology also structures Reformed theology from its beginning to its end and decisively shapes every doctrinal locus it touches. The Trinitarian system orbits around and explicates the organic relation between the Trinitarian processions and the covenantal missions of the Son and Spirit, creating image bearers and natural religious fellowship under a covenant that comes to consummate communion with the triune God in the heaven temple, or in an earth and a people who are conformed to heaven's glory. All of this comes to fruition apart from grace that elevates the temporal creature above his created nature to a share in the eternal processions themselves, where the divine essence itself becomes the medium by which the intellect sees and loves God. In our next module, we will begin to develop what Voss called the deeper Protestant conception as the Reformed path that leads away from ascending ontological participation in the essence of God toward the confirmed covenantal communion with God as we explore the beginning of Colossians 1:15 through 20 in light of confessional Reformed theology as enriched by the work of Reformed biblical theology. We will pursue the deeper Protestant conception, the representational principle, as the synthesis and extension of Reformed Trinitarianism and Reformed Federalism as a totalizing alternative to Thomas's system of exitus and reditus.